another SheVotes Olszewski local councillor meet and greet. This is our first one in London because last week we hosted a fantastic Instagram live with another candidate for local council in Welwyn Garden City, Michał Szewniak, and hope this evening is equally as fruitful and engaging for everyone. I'm Marzena Żukowska. I'm the co-director of Polish Migrants Organized for Change, or Pomoc, and I'm joined with four absolutely fabulous guests that I will introduce to you shortly. But before we delve in, I'd like to just say a few words about why we're gathered here today. So next week, on May 5th, there are local elections happening all across the UK. In England alone, we have 146 councils that will hold elections, and that includes all 32 boroughs of London, so the stakes are quite high. And as an organization dedicated to the leadership and empowerment, specifically of Polish and Eastern European migrants living here in the UK, Pomoc and our partner organizations have been running SheVotes Olszewski, which is a mass mobilization campaign to try and engage Polish voters, specifically women, ahead of the locals. And why do we this? Basically, because despite the size of our community, Polish migrants, like many other migrant communities, continue to be very much systematically excluded from public life, right, and structures of power in this country. And we're very much trying to change that, to build real kind of progressive political power in our communities, especially in the aftermath of Brexit and the continued onslaught of hostile environment policies. I mean, I personally can hardly withhold my grief and rage at the passing of the Nationality and Borders Bill last night, which will inevitably make it so much harder for many of our communities here in the UK. But this is exactly why conversations like this matter so much, because it's a space where people who have lived experience of migration or a strong connection to it, like our speakers, who are in political office, are actually brought into direct dialogue with the communities they represent. So without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our brilliant speakers in alphabetical order because we're so egalitarian. So we've got Lara Parisotto, who is a candidate for Brentford West in Hounslow and is also the Our Home, Our Vote campaign lead. She's originally from Brazil, and in addition to being my ride or die on the dance floor and a karaoke master, Lara is a longtime campaigner for migrants' rights and expanding voting rights for everyone in this country. We've got Ioana Olaru, who is a candidate for Downham in Lewisham. She is originally from Romania, works at the London Borough of Lambeth, and moved here to university in 2011. Fun fact, if Ioana wins her seat this year, she'll become the first Romanian councillor in all of South London, which is incredibly exciting. We've also got Richard Olszewski, who is a councillor in Fortune Green in the borough of Camden. Richard is of Polish heritage, and his career has taken him from working on the railways all the way to being a special advisor to the former cabinet minister in Tony Blair's government. Richard's family has an incredible post-war history, and I'm hoping that he can speak to it himself later. And finally, we've got Uzma Rasool, who is a Kashmiri heritage local councillor in Grove Green and Waltham Forest. In addition to her council work, she's also the director of Vocal Communities, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan org that helps marginalized communities in London and in the UK. They advocate for various issues that affect Black and Brown communities, from school exclusions to COVID-19. So thank you all for joining us. I have talked very long, so let's dig into the questions. I'll start with a very provocative one, which is that you all seem like such sensible people. What in the world brought you into politics? Lara, I'll turn it over to you, and then feel free to pass the mic to someone else.
Well, sensible, perhaps. I hope to be sensible sometimes, most of the time. Well, basically, I arrived at the UK in February 2014, full of hope and potentially a bit naive, thinking that all of the opportunities would be right there for me, and many of them were. But there were, of course, as most of us learned upon arrival in the UK, that there are a lot of obstacles. I was immediately had to start working really hard. I knew that I was going to have to work hard, but I started working as a cleaner. I was working full time. I was working part time in the evenings and studying full time during the day. And I did start to struggle. I started to struggle to pay rent, to just afford general things like food and basic necessities. And when I reached out for support in my local council, I was basically told no, I wasn't eligible for any of the support that some people have. It's already limited enough. But yeah, I just learned that there was no support available to help a young person like me who was trying to succeed, who was trying to study and work. My working conditions were absolutely terrible. The entire office where I cleaned, it was all of the workers were migrant workers and very low pay. When we tried to ask for better support, our manager would just say, well, if you complain, I just have someone lined up to take your job tomorrow. Again, housing situation was pretty horrible. Our landlord just kicked us all out of the house within one week. We had to move out. So slowly but surely, all of those things just said this has to be different. And I always knew that it wasn't just an individual situation of me experiencing that. I saw my other Brazilian friends experiencing similar situations of, again, precarious work, precarious living conditions in London, difficulty affording to live. And often politics wasn't doing the right thing. Like, we were watching what was going on in the news, and the priorities were supporting those who were already doing well rather than those who were in need of support. And that just pushed me to want to study politics at university. And now that I am out of uni, to actually try politics, try to see if I can do a little bit better for the things that I experienced and for the things that others from my community are still experiencing.
Thanks so much, Lara. I'll maybe pass it to you, Uzma. What brought you into this work?
I think main thing that brought me into this work was, it's the ward I'm standing in right now. I actually grew up in, so I grew up in the ward I'm currently a councillor for. And for me, it's ensuring that local people are represented, and that's local people from all backgrounds. So my parents and myself, we're all migrants. So my parents came as adults, and I came when I was very young. I was about a baby, 8 months old, when I moved to the UK. But seeing my kind of parents and some of the struggles they went through as migrants, I found that for a lot of the migrant communities I represent and the migrant community I was from, which is the kind of Pakistani Kashmiri community, there was like a big information gap, and there was a lack of access to a lot of public resources, or they didn't really feel as though they could connect with politics. So for me, when I entered politics, I wanted to make sure that I really stood up for local people. And especially in my ward, it's probably one of the most diverse wards in Waltham Forest. And it's it's like a kind of transactional ward. So what I mean by that is, like, the ward changes quite a lot because we have a lot of rental accommodation. So people are moving in and out because it's kind of a really nice place next to the central line. And it means that often I get lots of casework where people are being openly exploited by landlords. Even though we have landlord licensing, sometimes it's not enough. And for me, I think it's really important that as kind of migrants, or in general, politics has that level of diversity, and not just across class, but across ethnicity and background, because it's only when we have that do we see that everyone is represented clearly. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Uzma. What about you, Wana? What brought you into wanting to run for council?
So I think what Lara said really resonates with me, because I've moved here for university, but I've had to work throughout, and I've always found the awareness that many of my fellow migrants had when it came to things like minimum wage or their rights as renters. The awareness was not there. And I think now, being involved in politics, but I've also found is the lack of awareness of what the local council does, or their rights of being able to vote in elections and so on. So I'm very passionate about ensuring both representation, so making sure that people know what their rights are, and people know how they can get involved, But also, I think I'm also very passionate about making sure that people know how to get involved in their local communities, because I think a lot of people have moved here thinking, oh, it might be just 3 years, it might be a short time, but then they ended up staying here. They've been here for 10 years, they ended up having a family. And I think it's very important that people are always shown the opportunities for them to get involved and have their voices heard.
Thank you so much, Juana. And Richard, over to you, because you have been in this for a very long time. So you not only were brought into it, but you stayed in politics. So what was that journey like for you?
Yeah, well, I've been in one form or another in politics for more than 40 years, including delivering leaflets in the 1979 general election as a schoolboy for the Labour Party. I think probably what drew me into it was it's a combination of things, which were a family. My parents were themselves not active in politics, but interested in it. So we always had the news on at home. We always had a selection of newspapers, and there was talk in the house and so on. I mean, my parents, they came to Britain in 1946 as they were displaced persons because of the war. I mean, when the war broke out in Poland, they were just teenagers. My father tried to get away to Switzerland, but got caught in Austria and then was put in a concentration camp to the end of the war. My mother was put into forced labour for the SS. And they ended up in London, curiously enough. And my first home was actually near Brentford West. I lived off Chiswick High Road, but as the accent would tell you, I moved to Scotland at a very early age. But my parents were interested in politics. They didn't become British citizens until 1974, but they would always talk about politics, whether it's politics in Poland or what was going on in Britain. And I think unusually for their generation of Poles was that they were very strong Labour supporters. Most Poles of their generation, there was a reaction against, obviously, the communists taking over Poland and many people on the left in Britain being almost apologetic for the communists and so on. But my parents were unusual in that respect. So we always talked about politics. I had an interest in it. And I kind of grew up thinking, well, Labour was the party that was for me, because I went to working class schools in central Scotland, where almost all the children were working class. And therefore, it was a sort of a general Labour atmosphere. And in my secondary schools, a couple of my teachers actually became elected as MPs in the 1970s. One for Labour and one for the Scottish Nationalists. I got recruited to deliver leaflets as a schoolboy by my English teacher who lived in my village and was in the Labour Party. And then I was taught economics by someone who was an activist in the Labour Party. So we talked about it. And as a teenager, I grew up when punk rock was, the thing. And a lot of punk rock was highly political in many respects. And that just kind of shaped me, and then also made me think, well, if all these silly punk rockers were able to make a record and they could barely play their instruments, it meant you could sort of take part in things. So I thought, well, I'll join the Labour Party. And it just one step after another. None of it really planned, including working for MPs and things like that. And I eventually ended up, my interest took me to being elected to Camden Council and getting on there. I did 2 terms about 20 years ago and then came back to represent where I live. And what sort of drew me was that combination of knowing what my own political views were as they developed. I was quite clear from an early age, in my early 20s, that my position was a sort of moderate reformist Labour politics, and I always was consistent in following that. And that what followed from that was that if you're involved in politics, it's about making a practical difference. And that's what drew me to standing for office. And it's the enjoyment I get from it, is that I know that I'm fortunate that I'm representing a party that's in power in my borough, so I'm making decisions, etc. But I'm also aware that you're engaging with people and making a contribution that way. So I find that very satisfying. But I think the overarching question, though, is when you get involved in politics, is you're odd. You're odd to want to do it, because most people find it really boring and they get on with their lives and things like that. But I think it's important to get across to people, though, that it is worthwhile. And I would encourage anyone to do it.
Thank you so much, Richard. What an incredible history. So I think points that all of you raised, and something that I'd like to tease out, maybe before we get to some of the questions about voting, is this kind of relationship between national and local politics. I think it's safe to say that we are at a point where we should be concerned for the future of democracy and human rights in the UK. And we have had, over the last few months, many bills going through Parliament, and some that have already passed, that should make us worried, right? The Nationality and Borders Bill, the Elections Bill, the Crime and Sentencing Bill, legislation that can hinder who's able to vote, who's able to remain in this country and call it home, how we're able to express dissent and engage in democracy overall. So, I guess to put it bluntly, what I'd like to ask all of you is, with these issues feeling so daunting, right? Immigrant rights, voting rights, what can we actually do at the local level politically? Does local politics matter? Can local politics actually impact the national direction that this country takes? Awana, maybe I'll start with you. Big question.
Yeah, it is. So obviously, whilst on a local level, we can't make the decisions themselves. I think what is really important, as Uzma was saying previously, I think it's just raising awareness on a local level, because I think very often, and I think during COVID, I think that has been a very good example where numerous rules were brought in and many people did not understand what are the current rules, what should I do, and local councils were the ones where a lot of people got their information from, and a lot of local councils showed very good practice by translating the information they had in multiple languages, making it all very accessible. So I think one key role that councils can have is around raising awareness and making people aware of what's going on. But also from a political point of view, I think a key area that we always need to continue with is campaigning and making sure that people know how they can raise their voices, know who to contact, so whether it's their local MP or other people, and just making sure that people feel engaged in topics, especially in topics that will affect them. So, for example, the Elections Bill will affect a very large number of people who, for example, don't have photo ID. So people will realize probably way too late that they are in that category. And even if they would want to get involved and vote or anything else, they probably will be disenfranchised from that.
Thank you so much. That's such an important point. What about you, Uzma? What do you think? What's the impact of local politics on national policy?
I think it's really important, because I think what happens locally kind of drives sort of national policy, and vice versa. So what happens nationally can really affect things at local level. And I think the best example, and I say this as a councillor for my London borough, that is in the northeast of London, and that is, for example, budgets and budget cuts and resource allocation. So in the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen some of the biggest cuts to council budgets. And it's kind of meant that local politicians, local councillors have had to make tough decisions about vital services. So, you know, the two things are strongly linked. Even any legislation that gets passed, I mean, for example, right now, the government's talking about levelling up agenda. And, you know, rightly so, it's talking about a lot of neglected kind of post-industrial areas, but also it's kind of, I believe, the levelling up agenda, for example, has failed to address the kind of big budget constraints and problems we have in London boroughs, right? Where there's lots of high demand. So we need to really, I think at local level, be the voice for people and be able to lobby government and lobby kind of our national politicians to really push for change. I know that locally we do that. In Waltham Forest, we always push kind of national, you know, national forums. We always push sort of national politicians, so, you know, MPs and other people represent us. We always kind of make sure that they're lobbying for us. So I think that's really important, that we kind of tell people that what happens locally does have an impact and it can have influence. I think we need more of that. I think often we forget how important local councils and local government is, and having good people at local government level is really important. And we know that because I think the average age of, I think only 15% of councillors in the UK are under the age of 45, according to the LGA census, last one. No offense to older people, but it is a big problem that you know, 85% of our councillors are over 45. And it means that we've got a whole kind of section of society that's completely disenfranchised. And we know that, for example, young people who are living in really expensive places are going to get hit even worse with the cost of living crisis on top of like the big rent that they pay. So, you know, it's really important that we have the local representation and the national, and that it's kind of reflective of the communities that, you know, we're supposed to represent.
Thank you, Uzma. Lara and Richard, I'll turn it over to you, but I'll throw in maybe another layer to this, which has come through one of the attendees. And the comment from Agnieszka is that people are complaining about local councils not realizing that the money that was cut was actually cut on a higher level, right? And that kind of had a trickle down effect of then councils having to deal with it. So maybe the budget considerations, just flagging that for you. But Richard, would you like to respond?
Yep. Speaking of someone who's over the age of 45, yes, I know exactly what you mean. When I was first on the council, I was like one of the younger members of the council. Now I suspect I'm probably tending to the older version. I think there is a strong relationship between local and national, even though in this campaign the Conservatives in Camden have changed their name to Local Conservative Party, which the big hustings made everyone laugh. I think the local government works under the umbrella of what's established by national government, and it's very difficult to escape that. And we're talking about things, you mentioned things like voting rights and immigration and so on. I suppose, ultimately central government has the full range of power, etc., because that's the hierarchy of power. But you can still exert influence on it and pursue, whether you're in tune politically with the government of the day or not, you can still have some influence and shape things to some extent, as your own group's political outlook would determine. You can do that through the practical application of government policy and so on, and try and shape it. You can, for instance, although, as a Labour councillor, I would be critical of the government's approach on immigration, refugees and asylum seekers. In running Camden, we tried to shape the administration in Camden so that the message we send out is that we are open, we welcome refugees from anywhere and willingly accept them into Camden. We've done it historically, for generations. There's a big Bangladeshi community in Camden, and we were open to them coming. More recently, we took in refugees and migrants from Somalia. We have a strong Somali community. We've taken, I think, at the early stages, Camden in the UK took in about the highest number of refugees from the pullout from Afghanistan, and willingly. And although the numbers of Ukrainian refugees is still small, we've made it clear to any Ukrainian organizations and to our own residents that we welcome them, and we will, as far as we can, make it easier for them to come to Camden. So we support individual people who are going through the scheme to bring sponsored refugees. We are waiving council tax rules so that any resident who takes one in doesn't get penalised by having to pay more council tax, etc. We know we have the discretion to do that. As a Labour council, we are deeply opposed to forcing people to use ID in order to vote. Not a lot we can do that, but in general, we try to be as responsive as possible to people who, are late to register for voting, lose their ballot papers, etc. We want them to vote, and we try and help them to do that. You can also interact with government and try and influence them in behind the scenes, and councils can do that through the civil service network. You may not shift the big political players, but you have leverage over civil service. Well, you have leverage, but you have some influence, because they need to understand how the national government's policies get implemented. In the aftermath of the Grenfell fire, just weeks later, Camden had to remove the same cladding from 5 very tall buildings. And we just did it, and it cost us a fortune. And the costs of replacing it with safer material also was going to cost us a fortune. And we kept contact through civil servants, etc., to show that we were, trying to keep ahead of the curve, etc., and being proactive and not simply doing nothing until the government gave us lots of money. We just did it. And it meant that we had credibility with government. And the end result was they gave us £80 million just for Camden to cover those costs. So you can have a degree of influence there. You can also do actual outright campaigns and so on. We did it on trying to get funding for council house building. And you also have a way in which you can shape the general political and policy environment, both if you're in power, how your council does things. Camden is quite innovative in many respects, and it gets looked at by other councils and so on, about how to do social care, how to do house building, and so on. And you're also contributing to the general political debate in the country. And I was looking at the question about the money being cut. So I'm trying to sort of understand the premise of it. I'm Camden's cabinet member for finance, so I'm all too well aware of how our funding has been cut. It's been cut by 69% since 2010. And what we've done is obviously make a fuss politically about that, but we've also adapted our services as best we can in order to cushion the blow and protect things as much as possible. So we use much more digital, etc., which saves us money. Sold off buildings and consolidated where we have our offices, so we save money, and therefore try and reduce the effect of the cuts on the level of services that we provide.
Thank you so much, Richard. That's very comprehensive. I think the point about local councils just the small step of making certain communities aware that they're welcome, right? That actually is a fairly radical political act in some ways. So Lara, over to you, because I know that you've done so much work on this front of specifically looking at the intersection of voting rights and migrants' rights and what local councils can do. So maybe you could share a bit about that work as well.
Yeah, not much more to add. Everyone has spoken a lot and very comprehensively, but I think another angle to look at it is electoral politics. The media, politicians, the top people in the political parties will be looking at the local level results to think about their future strategies for the leading up to the general election. If Conservatives lose lots of councils, that will influence potentially who the new leader of the Conservative Party is, or how they strategize for the future. Similarly with Labour, if Labour makes losses or gains, it will influence how the party internally thinks about continuing to win, what kind of strategies they want to employ for the future. So if you are keen on what the government of the day is doing, show that through the ballot box locally as well, because it will definitely help influence it nationally. But of course, when it comes to general policies, councils often have to implement them. So with the elections bill that we've been working on so hard, it will come down to local councils to and council officers and electoral administrators to check the person that is bringing the photo ID in the future to vote, as well as EU citizens who will have to be removed from the electoral role because of the elections bill. So just to explain to those who might not know, at the moment, all EU citizens can vote in local elections. Now the bill passed last night, it will go for royal assent and it will become the Elections Act. And it will say that only EU citizens who arrived in the UK before December 2020 will continue being able to vote unless their country of origin has a bilateral voting rights agreement with the UK. So it's your local authority will have to implement that. And most of it will just be technicalities of implementing it. But then there's also the making sure that the bureaucracy of your council is being done well enough. And of course, your elected councillors can shape that. But secondly, is communicating this change will be complex. Us as future candidates and councillors will have to go out on the doorstep and explain this to people, and we'll have to find simple, accessible language to reach out to all of our diverse communities and explaining to them that their vote depends on their date of arrival in the UK, their nationality, and if they have a bilateral voting rights agreement with the UK. So it will become complex, and it will be our job to explain that and make sure that those who are eligible to vote do vote, and to make sure that those who can't vote are finding other means of making their voices heard by, for example, citizens' assemblies or other informal but equally meaningful interactions. Similarly, with the Nationality and Borders Bill, refugees will continue arriving in the UK, and some of them, even if they're not eligible for council services, will reach out to their councils. As Oana said, councils are there as the first point of contact for most. A lot of them will then receive the sad news that they're not eligible for a council service, and truly the council can't do anything about that. But it doesn't need to stop there. We can make the active choice of helping that person be signposted to an NGO, a local organization that can help them, one, either regularize their status in the UK, or secondly, just receive support from in a charitable level. And yeah, just in everything that others have already said, it's important for us to campaign as internally in our political parties. As councillors, we gain a little bit more power to try to influence from inside. So if we want, for example, the Labour Party to be more progressive on immigration, we can do that influencing from inside and passing motions locally and changing the face of our party, having more people that represent diverse communities, so that slowly but surely we change that towards more progressive policies.
Thank you so much, Lara. I am already dreading the local elections next year and having to explain so much of this to our communities, though of course Poland does have a bilateral voting rights agreement right now with the UK, which is helpful, but so many other people are not in that position. So I would like to switch gears just a little bit because all 4 of you are actively campaigning this year. And I suspect that there are probably some people tuning in who are curious what this process looks like. You know, because ultimately we want people to be voting, but there are so many other ways to engage in democracy, and standing in an election is another step of that process. So I'm hoping that you all could kind of collectively explain, what does the process of standing in an election look like? How do you start campaigning? How do you become a candidate? How does someone get started? Like, what is the first step? How do you make that happen? And is the process really, really exhausting?
I think it does depend on each political party. Each party will have a different system. I think we're all Labour candidates in here. So of course you what for I'll let others explain the more like outside of the political sphere, but within the political party, you'll have to firstly have proved yourself to the party a little bit. You have to be known to your local members, because before you're a candidate, you have to be selected by the members of the political party where you live, your specific ward, for them to vote for you to be the candidate, almost equal like a primary system in the US. So your members of your party will vote for you to be the candidate, and once you are the candidate for that local ward, then you're going to go out to talk to the public. So there is a lot of, before you are announced as an official candidate, there's a lot of internal politicking going on, where you have to make connections, network with the members of your party. You have to find those who are aligned with your politics within the bigger political party, tell them why you think you're going to be a good candidate. You also have to think about what ward you want to represent. Sometimes, as Uzma said, you want to represent where you were born, where you grew up, but sometimes you, for another reason, might want to represent a different one where you work. So you have to learn about what's going on in the different wards of the authority that you live in, to identify what would be your preferred one and what reasons you'd like to stand for that one. But maybe others can cover what happens after in the real world, or more questions about internal as well.
Yeah, I can come in about after. So once you get selected by a party, or you're running as an independent, however you're running, it's really important that you grasp kind of what are the key local issues, because local elections are very specific with their campaigns. So what are the local issues? For example, it may be that a local hospital needs urgent upgrading, and as a council, as a councillor on the council, you might be pushing for more funds to help with that. It could be stuff to do with parks, with developments. There's quite a few things locally that are specific to an area. So you need to be clued on about what are the local issues and what are the areas where people have concerns. Even if it's, let's say, not specific issues like local ones, it may be that residents in general care about the climate emergency or climate crisis. So it may be that you would, in your local capacity, promise to take steps to improve the environment locally, whether that's through encouraging cycling, whether that's through encouraging more outdoor space. There's lots of things you can do. So it's really kind of understanding what are the needs, what are the kind of key issues that people are talking about. And then when you do campaign, how are you going to approach that? And what can you offer residents that's different to other people? And that's really important. So having a sort of knowledge of your local area, key issues, and your local people. And I think before you're a candidate or a councillor, you need to really immerse yourself with local groups, local businesses. You really need to make those connections to help boost your chances too. It's really important, because if people have seen that you've done the local work, whether that's through local campaigns or local events maybe that you're involved in, then people do trust you more and you're more likely to win them over. So that's a big tip I would recommend, is understanding your area and getting involved in your area as a big.
I think I mean, I think all of that is very sensible advice. What I would say is the starting point. I'd mentioned this earlier, is for you to have a sense of who you are and what your politics are, how you view things. So, you know, where would that lead you in terms of a political party? Which is the usual, though not the only route into local politics. But I think essentially we're talking about party, you know, representing a political party. So you need to be aware of yourself, aware of what your views are, which then leads you to one party or another. And then for each of those parties, it's knowing where your views place you within those parties, because there's a range of views within them as well. And I think that's quite fundamental to you being clear that you want to do it. And it helps you get through some of the tough parts, etc., because you know why you're there. And then you have the practical things, which is fundamentally it's to get involved in one way or another and be active. Be active in your community. Be active in the party that you join. And it does require some hard work, you know, to go to meetings, etc., to do some work. And you have to put in the effort in order that other people will quite willingly put in the effort for you. You know, it's a two-way thing. And by building your knowledge and your experience and your ability to deal with people, to understand issues and how decision-making works, which you know, there's not a magic pill that gives you it all, but it builds up over time. That gets you noticed. People might realize, oh, maybe so-and-so, they should be a candidate for the council. When I first started out, I stood for the council in the town I lived in the village I lived in Scotland, with the political teachers that lived in it. And I went along to my local Labour Party and I just did things, delivered leaflets, a little paragraph or two for the local newspaper news column and things like that. So I was busy. And then it was like, well, we need someone to be the secretary of our little branch. And they just looked at me because they saw I was doing things and capable and so on. Then it was the council elections. It wasn't a Tory, it was a safe Tory seat. It was a quite safe Tory seat, so it wasn't very competitive. But they said, who's going to be the candidate? And again, they just turned to me and said, you know, and I sort of had a notion I'd have a go. And in a way, I became like an obvious person to do it because I'd done all this activity and work and able to talk to people beforehand. So that can kind of lead you there. It doesn't mean that you have to have a grand plan. But if you do that kind of work and do that little bit of thinking and so on, it will get you there. And then you have the practical things that you have to go through, process and such like. And different parties have different processes. The Labour one is quite bureaucratic. Other parties, I suspect, are a bit more fluid and quicker in how they do things.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think the workload point is very important, especially I think you need to know what you're signing up to, and because I think many people get interested in it and then they realize actually if I get elected I would be representing 6,000 people, or who knows how many more, 10,000 people, depending on the ward you're in. So I think you need to understand the work of campaigning and so on, but also the work that you would have, especially, and I think Uzma was right on understanding what the local issues are, because I think maybe you don't have you don't know that much about that specific issue. I don't know, whatever it is. Maybe it's housing, maybe it's something else. So I think it's also about it's a journey for you of learning how to help other people.
Can I just add one thing? Because I've been asked about this before, whether the people are asking me about my migrant background or like being a bit xenophobic about it, and the reality is no. Like I haven't had, virtually no one has pointed that out. Sometimes they comment on it, oh, you've got an accent, or where are you from, but mostly they're just interested in what I'm going to do about parking or the local development. So your political views actually come as much more important than where you're from. So I wouldn't, don't let that put you off, because people are just much more accepting towards that than many would like to, many actually think.
Thank you for that addition. We have a question from Carol Vincent, who is in Waltham Forest. So following the, I'm just going to read it. So following the COVID pandemic, during which care and support workers had free parking, the council has now revoked the parking. There's now a campaign, CASWO, to get the council to reinstate the free parking. This is an issue that has captured the electorate's attention. Over 3,000 signatures thus far on a petition, and letters to councillors and questions on the doorstep to candidates about what they will do if elected. So the question is, will you support free parking or not? I suspect that is a question perhaps more to you, Uzma, being in Waltham Forest.
So I have been actually speaking to people working on this campaign, and I have repeatedly offered my support to the local care workers, especially after their amazing work during the pandemic. But in general, I think we really need to support public service workers. So from my personal perspective, I've supported it. And I hope to continue supporting that later on in my capacity as a councillor as well. So, yeah.
Great. So we are slowly going to wrap up. I'll see if we get any more questions from the audience. But my sort of final question to you all, I'm hoping you can keep it concise so that we can fit it into a tweet later. But basically, what's your kind of two-line pitch for why someone should vote in general in local elections, but specifically this election? Why someone who might be undecided, they're registered to vote, but they're not sure if it's worth the effort on the 5th of May. Why should they vote? So maybe let's start with you, Awana.
I think, yeah, making it very concise. I think just make sure that your voice is heard, and I think Lara said very, very correctly that political parties will be looking at what happens at local level. So if you want to send the message to whichever party, this is your opportunity.
Yeah, feel free to just jump in.
Okay, I'll go. Positively vote, because it's your right to shape the future that you want. But if you're not too bothered, vote, because otherwise your voice will not be put into the party's decision-making process.
I think voting does make a difference, because despite a lot of cynicism that's around about the political parties, there are differences between them. It might not necessarily be revolutionary type scale of differences, but they do offer different approaches, and that might not be satisfying for some people, but for other people it is quite important, and the different political parties can end up taking a different approach to how services are provided locally and so on. And by voting, political parties are aware that you're doing it, so they'll be more aware of your views, because they know that you, in your own individual way, have a voice and will be contributing to it. And that's why I wish younger people would vote in greater proportions, because then I think that, their voices would be all the stronger as a result.
Yeah, I think I agree with what everyone said. And what I would say is that to be able to have a democratic vote is, I don't like to use this term, it should be a universal right. In many places, it's not a right. So we're very fortunate that we have this, and I think we should use it because there's nothing that scares politicians more than what happens at the ballot box. It's why politicians are there, and we need to really show how we feel at the ballot box. And I encourage people to really get involved in politics as much as they can, because often it's silence from people and a lack of action from people that allows certain individuals to pass really oppressive laws and archaic laws, as well as we're seeing just recently. So I really hope that everyone, but especially migrant communities, really get involved in politics and vote. So yeah, I know there's more than 2 lines, but it's really important that you're seen as an active part, because if you're not, then no one wants to cater to you. And I know it sounds really bad, but that's how many politicians view it. So you need to be seen as like a strong collective.
Thank you all. I was going to throw out another reason, and please correct me if this is wrong. But being on the register can improve your credit worthiness. Is that accurate information?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
If you don't vote, you still get that, but registering to vote improves your credit score. So if you're not registered yet, register to vote. You will, if you haven't registered by the 14th of April, you will not be able to vote in these elections, but register to vote anyway. And if you are a student, you can also vote at your home. For example, if you live with parents in London, but you spend your term time at university in Bristol, for example, you can register to vote in both places for local elections. So always good to know that.
I think it can be taken into account, but registering to vote will also, it won't just improve your credit rating, allegedly, it will improve your political rating, because then the political parties will know that you're there and they'll be trying to win your vote and trying to persuade you, and that will give you a chance to grumble to them, complain to them, encourage them, whatever. So too late for this year's elections, but do it now if you're not already registered.
Excellent. Thank you once again to all of our excellent speakers. Lara Parisotto, Owana Olaru, Councillor Richard Olszewski, and Councillor Uzma. Rasool, thank you all for your time. We had almost all the corners of London represented. I will just give a quick plug for next week. So for those of you who are tuning in and are Polish speakers, next week on May 3rd, which is Polish Constitution Day, we're hosting another live event at 6 p.m. with Adam Piotr Bodnar, who is a Polish lawyer, educator, and human rights activist. He was the Polish ombudsman for citizens' rights from 2015 until July 2021, and was basically in charge of the main human rights institution in Poland. Now, if you're familiar with what's happening in Polish politics or have been following sort of the ongoing attacks on the rights of women, migrants and refugees, LGBTQ plus people and activists, then you know just how important Adam Bodnar's work has been. So that's May 3rd at 6 p.m. You can find out more on Pomoc's Facebook page. Thank you all so much again for joining us, and we'll definitely be passing around the recording. Thank you and take care.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Bye now.